Welcome to Behind the Muscle podcast. Today's guest is an IFBB Pro League judge. Today's guest is Paul Lauzon. Paul, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Quentin. Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here.
For sure. So Paul, I kind of like to kickstart my podcast asking all of my guests the same two questions. So the first question that I have for you is, who are a few of your favorite bodybuilders of all time?
Of all time, well, of course, Fuwad. I've been along for the ride with him for many years now. Not just, joking aside, not just Fuwad, being his training partner, but, his intensity and, his approach. And, I've always admired that. So, and I've been lucky to, been there for the ride for his career and, to train with him all the time. Dorian Yates had one of my favorite looks of all time. I love that hardcore, grainy, hard look that he always had, and he's the one that raised the standard as far as freakiness went. Ronnie Coleman, of course, Ronnie the GOAT, and another person I think that I'm starting to realize how much I did like him, but at the time maybe not as much while he was active, is Phil Heath. Now that Phil is retired, I think we're starting to see how great he was. Just hasn't been that dominant Mr. Olympia since him. Maybe Rami will become that, but he'll have to win a couple more to get that same kind of status as Phil, I think.
For sure. I want to ask you something, Paul, because you have been in the bodybuilding game for so long. You've seen so many different physiques. You mentioned something about Dorian Yates, just that conditioning, that graininess. Obviously I have my own personal opinion, but I want to hear from you. Do you feel like not necessarily the conditioning, because I truly believe that we control conditioning, right? But that look, that graininess, do you think that is something that we can attain through training, or do you feel like that is something that is more to do with genetics?
I think it may be a little bit of both, but I do think that it comes with a certain amount of time in the gym. With a certain, I think I've always felt it's a combination of the way you train with your, how many years in the gym, and you just get that mature look to the muscle. But I don't think you get that look unless you train a certain way. I think you have to train, that hardcore way, kind of that to failure and beyond, and heavy, and and then I think that combined with the years of experience, I think, is what gets that look.
And so just to kind of just follow up with that question, very similar. Do you feel like today's bodybuilders are lacking some of that graininess, or do you kind of see that same graininess that maybe you saw 10, 15, 20 years ago?
Yeah, it's a question that's, I think, a lot of people have right now. I think it's kind of been debated a little bit after the last Olympia and the Arnold. The way I feel about it is just like any sport, the look has kind of evolved a little bit to where it's gone to more of a fuller look. Back in the 90s and that, which is the era, that a lot of guys like to refer to, it was a bit of a different look. I don't think the guys are any less lean today, or you could maybe argue dryness, maybe not, at least in certain situations, maybe the dryness not as much. But I think it's because back then fullness wasn't required as much. It was more going on, deeper separations, lines, and conditioning. Not to say that those things aren't important today, but I think there's been more of an emphasis on fullness today. And so that's where I feel some of that is the reason for that argument that's going on right now.
Perfect. Second question, just to kind of start our conversation, Paul, at what age did you start lifting weights? And then why did you start lifting weights at that age?
I started at a very young age. I started at about 12, 13. My father was an avid weightlifter, and he always trained at home, though he didn't go to a gym. And so I'd always see him training in the basement. He had a training partner for a little while, his best friend at the time. And they were big. They were both big, strong men that lifted heavy weight. And, I always looked up to that. And that with, I was always a big comic book kid. So I looked up to the superheroes and their physiques, and sports too. I was always a big sports fan as a kid. And I always looked up to the more muscular athletes.
For sure. I want to ask you about your dad. You said that he lifted at home. Was there a specific reason why he just lifted at home as opposed to going to a gym, or what was the reasoning behind that?
I think it's just the way my dad was. He was a blue collar guy. He worked a couple jobs when I was a kid. I remember even when I was a kid, you know, we didn't have a lot of money, and I remember my dad like even like made his own weights. Like he'd have like a barbell, and he would just tie cinder blocks to the end of it, and he would use that. He would make like he made his own wrist curl, which was popular back then, like out of a wood sort of stick, I guess, but thicker. And he tied a rope and a weight to the end, and he would work his forearms like that. And he'd tie weights around his ankles and go running. Like my dad was a bit hardcore.
That's awesome. How did he, I mean, because obviously when he started lifting weights, lifting in the gym and bodybuilding was much less than it is today. How did he kind of get exposed to strength training? Do you know that or not?
I think it was just like he always read the magazines, so he always had the magazines at home. So he always liked bodybuilding, and my dad always liked like those types of sports. He was a huge boxing fan. He always liked strength sports and combat sports, and I think that's, you know, for whatever reason he steered in that direction. But he never competed. You know, he never had a desire to compete. And training in our basement, you know, he was limited with the equipment he had. Like remember from what I remember, like he had like a bench press and a squat rack, and that was basically it. And so he just did the basics. So like he was lacking like probably like the smaller body parts, you know, because he didn't have anything to isolate with. And I don't know if he knew, you know, to train that way anyway. But he was strong, and he was a smaller guy, but he was strong, and a big thick chest and that. And you know, I always looked up to my dad when I was a kid.
Yeah. No, I love that. I think it's so important to have that strong influence in your life in childhood. Now that I kind of asked that second question, Paul, just to kind of lead into my guests' backstory, their childhood a little bit, because I kind of like to get, as the name of the podcast implies, kind of behind the muscle, right? So
Yeah.
just talk about where you grew up. You already mentioned sports, so talk about maybe some of those sports, some of those other activities that you were involved in childhood. Did you have any siblings? Just paint the picture of childhood a little bit, maybe up to about high school, and then I'll follow up and we'll move on from there.
Sure. I'm the youngest of three boys. And I guess I'm kind of the mama's boy of the family. We have an Italian mom. My dad's French and Irish, but my mom's Italian. My mom's from Italy. So she's she was, at least when we were kids, a really old school, traditional Italian mom. And being the youngest, I think she wanted me to be a girl. And when I didn't, she kind of like, you know, babied me a little bit because I was definitely going to be her last one. But my oldest brother was a really good athlete when I was a kid, and I always looked up to him because I was into sports. My middle brother, he wasn't into sports at all. He's more into like mechanics, automotive, and things like that, which I wasn't interested in. So him and I didn't have a lot of common when we were kids. But my oldest brother, though, my brother Mark, he was sort of like my hero when I was really young. Him and my dad, for those athletic reasons. And then when I got to, I played a lot of sports when I was a kid. A lot of track and field. I love basketball. I was a huge basketball freak as a kid. I wasn't any good though. Played football in high school. Yeah, I never got into hockey though. I never learned how to skate. Baseball. I liked baseball, but I wasn't interested in playing it that much. But I regret. I wish I would have got into like boxing or something when I was a kid. My oldest brother did for a little while, but my mom was really worried about boxing too. That's one thing I do regret. I wish I would have gotten into like boxing or martial arts when I was younger.
Yeah, for sure. Now, did you actually grow up in Canada then?
Yeah, I'm born and raised in Windsor. I've been here my whole life.
Okay.
Yeah, I've never lived anywhere else.
Cool. Now, was there anybody outside of your parents, Paul? Was there anybody, was there a coach? Was there a teacher? Was there somebody that kind of had a really profound impact on your life when you were a kid, and you feel like that has even carried over to, you being an adult today, or was that main influence your parents?
I had a lot of good influences when I was a kid. Like I'm really close with my cousin. I have an older cousin, and we're still really close to this day. He's always been a good influence on me. He's a very successful person and always been very responsible. I felt like Windsor has always been a very blue collar town. It's an automotive town, not so much these days, but it was. And my dad worked in a union job in that too. So it's a very blue collar town. So and bodybuilding has always been a big part of Windsor. Sort of like it's always been like a subculture of Windsor, but a sort of a big subculture. And so being that I went to gyms as a kid. I was I was going to Gold's Gym by the time I was 16. Um, I would train on my dad's weights in the basement, and then I would wait for my dad to get home from his second job at night. I'd take his car and go to Gold's Gym and training for another hour or two. I was fanatical when I was a kid when it came to training. Um, so I don't know if I had like any specific one person who influenced me, but I did have some good influences around me. I tried to, my friends too, and I always try to, like, my friends throughout the years. I've always tried to I don't base my friends on their success, but people who've been a bad influence, I've tried to shed out of my life over the years. The guys, you know how it is. Like, you get certain friends over the years who are just into drinking and partying, and they're never going to change. And you know, some friends you had to cut out over along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Now Windsor, is that that's pretty close to Detroit. Is that am I correct on that?
Yeah, right across the river. Yeah, I
Okay.
work at the border.
Cool. Because I actually I'm currently in Iowa in the States,
Oh,
but
really?
I lived in Detroit for almost a year. I worked at the downtown YMCA there working with youth. And I
Oh,
know
really?
the bridge that just crossed right over into
Yeah,
Toronto. So that's kind of your neck of the woods, right?
into Windsor. Yeah, that's where I work.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
Perfect. Cool. Because I know Detroit, and I'm bringing that up because I know Detroit is pretty blue collar, pretty hardcore. There's a lot of
yeah,
old school hardcore gyms. The original powerhouse is
yeah.
in Detroit, so that makes a lot of sense. Now, I wanna ask you, Paul, when you were younger, what a lot of us grew up playing sports. We wanted to be a professional athlete. Was there something that you were kind of wanting to be when you were younger? Let's just talk about middle school, high school age. What did you kind of want to be when you grew up? Did you have any thoughts about that when you were younger, or did you just kind of
Yeah.
live in the moment, just living life?
Yeah, I love sports. I wanted to be a football player. Football, basketball are my two big sports that I loved, but I wasn't very good at either one. Football, I got a bit better at in high school when I got bigger and stronger. And basketball, though, I love basketball, but I couldn't jump, I couldn't shoot, I couldn't. Um, but I got into weight training young though, and football for me turned into bodybuilding. Because I'm being on the football team, you always trained, with weights, all your buddies. And I loved training with weights. And I was, after a while, I was like, I don't got time for football. I want to pursue bodybuilding. I want to pursue bodybuilding at a young age. Like around 16, 17 is when I was starting to decide that I wanted to do something with bodybuilding. And I did my first show at 19. So I got involved with bodybuilding pretty young.
All right, so we're gonna run with bodybuilding because it is life. And so you told me earlier that you started training at the Gold's Gym at 16. Talk about that experience, because overall, especially like you just mentioned the part of Canada where you grew up, gyms are almost non-existent nowadays. Right now we've got the health clubs, we got the fitness centers, and a quote unquote gym. I don't even think people really understand the difference between a health club, a wellness center, and a gym. Like, there's a big difference. So talk about
Huge.
that first Gold's Gym that you walked into. Talk about just what really pulled you into the gym, to bodybuilding. Just unpack all of that, because I want to hear about this in terms of your story, and I know my listeners do. So let's just talk about that.
Yeah, that old Gold's Gym that I trained at, that was still probably this day like my top two or three gyms that I loved that place. The atmosphere there this is going back to like the early 90s, late 80s. So it was, bodybuilding was a subculture, and the gyms weren't like they were today. They were subcultures. It was there were much fewer members. The people who went were dedicated, were there every day, and there wasn't socializing and stuff like that as much as there is today. Gyms were, I miss those days a lot. I miss those gyms. I really do. Windsor doesn't have a gym like that anymore. Fuwad and I want to start one, hopefully the next year or so. But there's no gyms like that in Windsor anymore. For a little while, what happened was I became like a regular at that Gold's Gym fast. I was there every day, sometimes a few times a day. So I became very good friends with, you know, the staff and the owner, because the staff were all bodybuilders and that too, right? So yeah, it was like a second home to me. And then, so when they moved locations, I even helped them move the weights to the new location. They bought a bigger place close by. It was at the time, and they dropped the Gold's Gym name and called it Central Fitness. And for anybody who's familiar with Fuwad's old training videos, that's where they're all shot. That was the ultimate gym for us. It was a pure bodybuilding gym. It was huge, like massive high ceilings, 20, 30 feet high ceilings. It was an old curling club. They turned into a gym. So it was just an ideal place. It had like 6 leg presses, you know, 6 hacks, squat racks. It was the best place to train. The atmosphere there was awesome. Like there was guys like Louis Joseph training there, Joey Flores, lots of guys locally who didn't turn pro that were big dudes. It was the best time to be around, in my opinion. Like there was about a good 10 years there that we trained there, where it was just, I don't know, it was a great atmosphere. I really, really miss those days.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, the gyms now, they're not like, Good Life ended up buying that gym and turned into a Fit for Less. They got rid of all the old good equipment, or at least most of it, and replaced it with a lot of their cheaper Fit for Less style equipment. Yeah, there's no gyms like that in Windsor right now, and it sucks. It sucks as a bodybuilder, but the bodybuilding game has changed so much too. You know, like you well know, I'm sure, like the gyms are packed full of anybody now, from, you know, like a middle-aged mom, you know, to like an elderly, you know, which has always been there before, but not in the numbers that there are today, which is great. But just I wish there was still a place for the hardcore crew, and that's what we want to build, hopefully in the next year or so.
Now we're gonna get on that subject here in a minute, but was there anybody, Paul, kind of when you started going to that Gold Gym at 16, was there a bodybuilder, was there an individual that kind of took you underneath their wing just to kind of teach you some of the basics and kind of really get you into the bodybuilding training? Because football training is a lot different than bodybuilding training and vice versa. So if there was somebody or a few people, talk about those early mentors, because that's important.
Yeah, my early stages, I became friends with a group of guys that were all bodybuilders, you know, and a couple of the guys were a year or two older than us, and they'd already one guy was a few years older, maybe 5, 6 years older, and they were experienced competitors. So when I decided to do my first show at 19, they just kind of all helped me. Like the one guy ended up becoming my training partner, and his name was Sean Clark. He probably could have been pro. He had really good genetics, but he started shortly after he was competing. He started a family, and he kind of got out of the sport. But he was a great training partner, though. And then another guy, Brian Van Vliet, who was an experienced competitor at the time, he did my diet for me, and yeah, those are my early influences. But there was really good bodybuilders in my gym who never turned pro. Like there was a guy, Mike Testani, who went on to the nationals. See, back then too, this is a point that I make to a lot of guys today. There's only 2 levels of turn pro today, at least in Canada. I believe the US is the same way. Like you do a regional show, and then you do a pro qualifier, and then you're pro if you qualify. Back in my day, when I first started, there was 5 levels to amateur. And then they dropped 1 level, they went to 4, and then it was 3, and now 2. Which I understand, you know, from an industry standpoint, and, you know, to grow the pro league, you know, it's been a necessary thing. But those old days, like guys were amateurs for 10 years before they turned pro, and only 1 guy a year turned pro in Canada. So it was very exclusive. It was very hard to turn pro. And it was a very small group of pros back in those days. It was a much, much different game in those days. But yeah, there was lots of great bodybuilders in my gym who didn't turn pro that were like high level amateurs that were very motivating to be around. Those are the guys that I looked up to and wanted to look like.
Talk about that first competition. I mean, you know, competing at 18, that's a young start. What was that like? You know, how did you place? And then once you got done with that first competition, that first prep, did you know that you were going to continue to live that bodybuilding life?
Yeah, my first show I did well. I did a junior category. So you had to be under 21. And I won my class, and then I went into the junior overall, the heavyweight versus the lightweight. I was the heavyweight winner. And the guy who won the lightweights was he was a a seasoned competitor at the time. I think he was Mr. Junior Canada at the time. But he came back to do that show for whatever reason. His name was Patrick Mock. He was a really good bodybuilder at the time. Amateur bodybuilder in Canada. He smoked me for the overall. But then the next year I came back. I did that show again at 20, and I won the overall. And I felt really good about that because there was a couple of guys in that show that were pretty experienced who were much bigger than me. But I just brought, I guess the judges felt a better package. So that really fired me up. And then Robert Kennedy, I'm not sure if you know who that was, but he was the owner of Muscle Mag International. So he's Canadian, he's from Toronto. I believe it was one of his editors was at the show. He was the MC of the show. And he must have mentioned something to Robert about me, because Robert Kennedy wrote me a handwritten letter and sent it to my home address that I wasn't expecting. And I was blown away that I received this letter from Robert Kennedy. And he was saying that he saw my pictures. He was really impressed with me. He wanted to, follow up with me and, follow me and see how I progress. And he asked me to send him some pictures. He wanted to put me in his magazine. So I was like on top of the world. So at that point I was like, I'm going to be a pro bodybuilder one day. That's what I was thinking. So, I did that. Robert Kennedy put a small picture of me in his magazine. That was, the highlight of my life at that point. And then, so the next year, I believe it was the next year or the year after that, I went to the next level, which for us was level 2 of the Western Ontario's. And I got to admit, at the time, I got a little bit big-headed. I thought, okay, I'm something good now. Not that I didn't take my prep lightly, but I thought, I was kind of arrogant in my prep. I don't know. I was a young kid at the time. I don't know. And I still did my prep properly. But when I went to the show, you remember Greg Kovacs?
Of course.
Greg Kovacs was in the show as an amateur. So I remember like going to the weigh-in and seeing Greg Kovacs and this other guy named Freddie Antiwi, who ended up turning pro years later. And Freddie was like the Canadian flex wheeler at the time. He was just like just physically perfect. And the two of them were in the show as amateurs. And I'm seeing these two guys backstage at the weigh-in. And I'm like, what the hell, man? Like, I'm in the wrong sport, Those are bodybuilders. I'm not a bodybuilder. Those are bodybuilders, So it just completely blew my head up. I did prejudge. I didn't even go back for the finals. I knew I was like last call out in my class. And then I did one more show shortly after that because I was still kind of like, well, I'll qualify for next year. But by that point, I was already kind of morally defeated. Did the next show, didn't diet as hard as I should have. Ended up placing like on the top 3, like 4th or 5th. And this was going back a step to the level 1 again. So now I was like just done with the sport for a little while. I was like, okay, I'm gonna have to find myself a career because bodybuilding is not going to be for me, obviously. So went back to school for a while, took some courses, started working some jobs, and then became a judge in that time as well. A little bit after that, I became a judge. But before I got back into competing, at least I became a judge. Just because my interest in the sport was always there. I just didn't think I would ever compete again. And then after becoming a judge, a couple years after that, the bug really started to bite me again. And then I decided to get back on the stage again. So I took a 10-year break though after that.
So there was a 10-year break after you kind of first initially started competing, right? That's what I just heard you
say.
say. Now, what is that kind of after you took that 10-year break and you got back into it? Is that where you connected with Fuwad and was he a big part of kind of getting back into the game? Why don't you go ahead and touch on that then, Paul?
Yeah, so I never become a judge, and I judged Fuwad's first show, which was here in Windsor. And I started to see him at the gym. I was starting to get to know him a little bit. He was, I could see right away that, he was progressing quickly. Like when those early days of Fuwad, he was putting on like 30 pounds a year of muscle. Like he was getting huge. And then I decided I wanted to compete again. And so I asked him one day, I didn't know him that well yet at that point. I knew him, but not that well. And I just said, hey, I want to get back on stage again. It's been 10 years. Could you help me out? I don't really know what to do anymore. And he was like, yeah, I'll help you out. And then we just became really close friends after we became training partners, close friends. And, and that was back in 2004 that we really became good friends back then. So, 17 years later.
Now, I think on one of the podcasts of Fuwad's that you're on and stuff, or maybe it's somewhere else, but I thought I heard that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but when you kind of first started to see him around the gym and stuff, I mean, you kind of thought he was an ass, right? Is that correct? Talk about that just a little bit.
he was cocky. Because for those who don't know Fuwad, he may come across that way. Because he's a big dude who, at the time, he didn't have his mohawk yet, but he always had a certain look to him that was probably a little bit aggressive, you could say. And I remember one particular day when I didn't know him that well yet, but he knew I was a judge. I was at the gym and I was getting ready to leave, and I was getting my stuff out of my locker, and he walks in and he was like, "Oh, hey," he was like, I just placed whatever at the candidates. I was like, "Oh yeah, I heard, congratulations, that's awesome, man." But in my head I was like, because remember I came from that day when, like, and this was still at the time there was only one maybe two guys from Canada during pro of the year. I've been around good bodybuilders, but to make that step to pros, it was a big step. It's a huge step, and nobody in Windsor had ever done it before. And I was just like, I've seen guys like you come and go. Like, you'll be done in another year or two, and you'll never hear from you again, kind of thing. And he was like, "No, I'm going to turn pro, man. You watch. I'll be pro, and I'll be on the Arnold stage, the Olympia stage in a few years." And I was like, "Oh, okay, sure, man." And and that's one of the things that I always really inspired me about Fuwad. He's always set big goals for himself, and he doesn't have any fear of going after them, and that's something that I lack in my personality. I think I'm very conservative in my personality. And I've always admired that about him. He was cocky, but when I got to know him, I was like, he's not cocky. He's very confident in himself, and he sets his goals high, and that's what motivates him to go after his goals. And I've learned to respect that.
Awesome. Now I want to, we'll probably come back to Fuwad here in a minute, because I do want to talk about and touch on what you said earlier about possibly opening up a gym. I know you guys kind of got that private little training area right now. We'll get to that, but career wise, so you took the 10-year break from bodybuilding. Just again, listening to different podcasts that you're on. From my understanding, your career currently is like border security. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So talk about how you got into that, because that's definitely a unique career. And then just, I know you can't really get into a lot of details, but just talk about, just that experience and what that's like being in that position.
Yeah. Well, it's like during that absence from bodybuilding, I started thinking more about, I got to find myself a career. So I wanted to become a firefighter. I took some firefighting courses early on in my life. I wanted to become a police officer, and then I kind of lost interest in that because I started bouncing in bars at about 19 too, and started to see like some of the stuff that police have to put up with, and that I didn't really want to be a cop. But I still enjoyed the security field. I worked as a bouncer, man, off and on for about 15 years. And downtown Windsor used to have a pretty cool, pretty crazy nightlife, and the bars used to be pretty crazy. That led me into they opened up a casino in Windsor. That was late 90s. I forget which year exactly now, but it was a big deal. Because in the States, you guys didn't have casinos yet. You only had the casinos in Vegas. So when they opened up a casino in Windsor, Americans were just flocking here. And this is before 9/11. So you could cross the border with a driver's license back then. It wasn't a big deal. And plus our currency back then was only worth, I think, 50% of the American dollar. So Americans were coming here with like $100 and like, having a great night. So downtown Windsor became a real hotspot. So the casino was crazy. It was like super big. Like it was extremely popular. There was lineups outside of the casino every single night. And they needed security. So I had some friends that were already working security there, and they told me, they were like, apply, we'll talk to our managers, put a word in for you, whatever. So I applied for security and I got hired, and I started working security at the casino. And that led me into applying to Canada Customs after a few years when I heard that they were hiring, and that led to me getting my job there, which has been a cool experience. I've been there 20 years now. So I'm nearing the end of my career there. I'm hoping to do another 5, maybe. But if all goes right, we'll see. I got young kids too. But it's been a very rewarding career and a very interesting career. And I'm lucky to have that job. I mean, Windsor has been hard hit a few times now by recessions and that. And there's been a lot of lost jobs in Windsor, a lot of good paying lost jobs. So, I feel lucky to have my job. It's a good job. But I want to get out of it soon. 20 years is a long time to be doing something.
For sure. Is there kind of like one story that you can kind of share that was maybe unique or kind of crazy from the last 20 years of doing that career?
There's many. I can't get the details about specific cases that that end up in court and stuff like that. We just had a pretty crazy incident though, like last week that was in the news, where a guy came across. There was probably some mental health issues there. Older gentleman came across to. I think he was trying to become. I think he was going to claim refugee status here. It was one he wanted to at least, and you could tell like he probably lived inside of his van, and he had 2 live grenades in there. So and because of the possible mental health issues and that, there was a lot of concern as to what else he may have, and what his intentions were and whatnot. So it was a big deal. They shut down the bridge. They shut down all the areas around the bridge. They had cut off the gas lines, everything, because they were afraid of it, more explosives being present and setting off a trigger effect of more explosions. So that was pretty intense.
Yeah, I would say so. Now, just for my own understanding, with all the current situation that's going on with the pandemic and stuff, are Americans able to cross that bridge right now and get into Canada?
Yeah.
It's kind of like, or what does that look like, Paul?
Yeah, it's open to Americans again now who are fully vaccinated.
Okay.
Yeah, and you guys just opened your border to us as far as land travel goes. I believe it starts November the 8th, I think is the date for fully vaccinated Canadians to enter the US. So
okay.
my wife's looking forward to that because my wife loves going to Target.
There you go. And that's actually a great segue. That's something I had written down, and then we'll get back into the bodybuilding stuff here. But again, like I just like to get the backstory and talk a little bit more than just bodybuilding, because you're on all kinds of bodybuilding podcasts. There's so many bodybuilding podcasts out there that just talk about the nuts and bolts, and I like to kind of just talk about some of the other stuff, because there is more than just bodybuilding. So
yeah,
fatherhood, you have 2 daughters, is that correct?
Yeah, 6 and 10. Yeah.
Okay, so talk about fatherhood. Talk about being a dad. I know just through some of your social media posts with your wife and your daughters. Obviously, that's a huge part of your life. So just talk about what fatherhood means to you and what it's like to be a girl dad.
It was probably the biggest. Obviously, the biggest, probably other than getting married, probably the biggest event of my life. The first time I became a father. It's probably the biggest transition I've ever had to go through in my life, becoming a father, because I didn't become a father until 38. I'm 49 now. I became a father for the first time at 38. And before I met my wife, I was a bachelor for about 10 years, which it was not a choice for sure, but I never met anyone that I really wanted to spend my life with, I guess you could say. And then when I met my wife, I knew there was something special there, and I pursued that. But with kids, like we didn't plan the first one. Our first one was kind of an accident, or a surprise, I should say. And it was only after about knowing each other for about less than a year. So like we got thrown into the fire a little bit, and my wife's much younger than me. So there was definitely some early on, there was some things we needed to work out and work our way through. But it was the best thing I ever did in my life. We very easily could have thrown in the towel early on and gone our separate ways, and did this other ways. But I think we both knew there was something special here. And even though it was rough getting through those early days, just getting to know each other and becoming parents at the same time, and the age difference, and we grew up in just different sides of the world. Like my wife never knew anything about bodybuilding before I met her, and so it was. I think it really built a strong foundation for us today, though. And I love being a dad. It's my girls are very special to me, and it's great watching them grow up and progress and develop their own personalities and lives and interests. And that's, I think, the coolest thing about fatherhood is watching that progression.
For sure. Do they kind of understand the whole bodybuilding thing, or do you kind of keep that away from them?
I don't. Very early on, I brought my youngest one. I brought her to a show or two when she was really small, just to kind of show her off, And my wife would, she'd come to the show, so she'd bring her for a little while. I don't, I would never discourage them from doing what they want to do. I'm hoping that, bodybuilding's a great thing, and I'd be okay with them competing for sure. Like, I think I think it's a great thing. I just want them to have balance. Like, I try to emphasize the importance of education to them, because it's a competitive world. It's a different world than when I was a kid, and it's only become more competitive. So, I want them to have as many advantages as they can have. So my wife is really well educated, unlike myself, and she's very smart, and she's really good with helping my kids, helping my girls with their schoolwork, because they go to French school. I don't speak French. And my wife doesn't speak it either, not fluently at least, but she can speak it enough to help them. And especially with last year with COVID, them being home and missing all that school time, she does a great job with them. They got a good mom.
Awesome. Awesome. You just have a different type of education, Paul, right? You have,
street.
you have life experiences, and
Yeah.
sometimes that's just as valuable as those of us that have a college degree or what have you. So
Yeah,
it's
definitely.
all good. It balances itself out, right?
It does. And yeah, like I said, we're from different worlds, my wife and I, but it's a nice balance, because I went to college for 1 year and I dropped out. I'm not, and my wife has 2 master's degrees. She has plus she has a bachelor's degree. She's really well educated, and it's a good balance.
For sure. I want to go back to being a judge. I had the owner of Armbrust Pro Gym on here.
Oh yeah.
Several weeks ago. So we got into a little bit of how you become a judge, but you're only the second IFBB Pro judge that I've had on the podcast. I think it's something that's fascinating, right? Because when you listen to bodybuilding podcasts, usually it's an athlete and kind of from their perspective of the judges and why they didn't place a certain way or what have you. So the first question I have for you, Paul, how does someone actually become an IFBB Pro League judge? What does the process look like to pursue that?
For me, it took many years. It's a progression. Here in Canada, I'm sure it's similar to the US. You apply to become a judge. You'll submit your application, so to speak, submit your resume, and the executive for the CPA, which is the Canadian Physique Alliance. That's sort of our branch of the NPC worldwide. Excuse me. You would send your resume in. It would be reviewed by the executive. They would determine your compatibility. One of the first thing they'll want to know is, are you a trainer? Do you train athletes? And if you do, you're automatically excluded, just because of conflicts of interest. Nobody wants any, accusations or perceptions of conflicts of interest with the judges and athletes. So that's one of the first things that right away, if you're training athletes, then so your resume will be reviewed. It'll be based on your experience, your compatibility as a judge, and then from that process, they'll probably want nowadays, because there's a lot of people want to become a judge now. Unlike when I first became one, when there was only some people who were interested in it, because we weren't really getting. I mean, not we don't get paid much to judge. You don't do it for the money. But back then, like, you were really not getting paid anything. Like, you're pretty much on your own for expenses and that. So you're really doing it out of passion for the sport, nothing else. So now you probably have to become an ambassador for a little while, which is a program that we have here in Canada for people who want to become judges or become involved with the organization. As an ambassador, you do have to go through a training course, so that you're in line with the CPA rules and regulations, because being an ambassador qualifies you to put on posing clinics for the CPA, or sanctioned posing clinics for the CPA, which is something that a lot of competitors really enjoy having these days. And there's always been a demand for it. For judges to do them from time to time, but it's difficult at times too, because again, like, you try to separate the judges from the athletes as much as possible. But we do put them on from time to time, just so everybody's aware of what we want to see, for our CPA rules and regulations, but which follow the NPC's rules. We want everyone to be, in line with how we want people to pose and presentations on stage and whatnot. So we will offer the clinics from time to time. But ambassadors it's more left up to the ambassadors to put those on if they wish to. And then they'll be asked to come to some shows to help out a little bit. And then eventually you'll become a test judge. So you'll have to test a couple shows your scores will be reviewed by the head judge and the executive, and they'll take it from there. And then as you progress down the line, you test judge each level down the line, and what determines if you be able to test judge that next level is going to be based on your experience, how you've performed so far as a judge at that earlier level, at that lower level, and so on. So it's a long process now. I've been a judge for over 20 years, and I just became a pro judge 3 years ago. I've been a national judge now for about 10, close to it at least, and I've been a head which I'm getting a lot of more experience with recently. Last year, when everything shut down, I didn't judge anything. I really missed it. And so I'm glad this year. I've been judging a lot of shows recently, so I'm glad to be back in the mix again.
For sure. Now, the pro show that you've judged within the IFBB, has it just up to this point just been the Toronto Pro? Have you done a couple other ones?
I did the Niagara Falls Pro in November of 2019, right before the pandemic started. That was the only one I've judged so far. I'm judging the Toronto Pro coming up December the 5th. And the ones that I know of right now, and I'm also judging a pro show in Vancouver in May. Hopefully I'll get a couple more in between there, but those are the ones that I know for sure coming up.
Very cool. Very cool. Now I'm assuming then, when you become a IFBB pro judge, then what is kind of like, do they have for you guys like kind of I don't know how to necessarily word it, but is there like an expectation of how you guys carry yourselves, as an IFBB Pro League judge? Like, do they have certain like guidelines, rules, expectations in terms of like even your own personal life? And I mean, like if you got arrested, I mean, would that disqualify you? What does that look like?
That's a good question. There's no official code of conduct, so to speak. But there is a professional standard you're expected to maintain. Absolutely. Especially, getting back to competitors, relationships with competitors. I mean, it's encouraged to be open with competitors. If competitors want feedback, we want to be very open about that. We want to be transparent about what we're looking for and why. But you have to make sure there's a line drawn. Your relationships can't get too close to competitors for obvious reasons, conflicts of interest. I can't speak for others, but for myself, I try to maintain a professional image when I'm judging. Well, at all times, I guess, but especially when I'm judging. Because, as a head judge, especially, you're representing the organization and yourself. And, the last thing I want to do is appear unprofessional. So and I'm sure every head judge feels the same way about that. Every judge, for that matter, feels the same way. So there's no official code of conduct, but it's an unspoken thing. You handle yourself a certain way. You conduct yourself a certain way.
So, okay, as from through the lens of a judge, because you hear different people in terms of bodybuilding commentary, kind of talk about different things in terms of judging criteria. So for you, what you've learned, all of your experiences, being in the position you're in at this point, Paul, as an IFBB Pro League judge and a head judge for amateur shows and things like that. What is kind of the general judging criteria in terms of, we'll just stick to bodybuilding because that's what you and I are super passionate about. Like what is the judging criteria? Like when a group of 10 athletes comes out on stage, I mean, what immediately are you looking for? What are they, the IFBB, what are they teaching you, training you to kind of look for? What does that look like, not only initially, but then just as they go through their rounds of posing? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Then that's something that's going to come a little bit of experience, but also with an eye. There's a certain eye for bodybuilding, I find. And not everyone has, and that could be because you're involved in the sport or whatever, but there's a certain eye. So what the focus is always on the total package. There's no one particular attribute that's more important than the others, be it conditioning, size, symmetry, muscularity. They're all equally important, but it's the sum of all those parts that is the most important thing. So I could always, like, especially early on when, judging smaller shows, you can pick out an inexperienced judge very quickly, and you try to correct those things for them by. So when you're judging a show, you get some good bodybuilders. You may have one guy who's got awesome shape, great symmetry, full, but his conditioning is a little off. Which is something that frequently happens at an amateur show or a special regional show. Then you'll get another guy in that class who's shredded, but he's missing body parts, his symmetry's off, maybe he's thick-waisted from the front, there could be different issues like that. An inexperienced judge may look at that shredded guy, especially if he's got like the body parts that give you that wow factor that are shredded, like glutes, for example. When a guy turns around, his glutes are deeply shredded, it's one of those things that stands out, because you don't see that on every competitor. So like an experienced judge may see that and be like, put that person first because they're sort of wowed by those factors. But a more experienced judge will take that in consideration, that level of conditioning. But if the other person has better shape, but more size, better symmetry, and conditioning's off, maybe not as good, but all the other areas are stronger, in that scenario, you'd probably go with the guy who's got, maybe not as conditioned, but is a better bodybuilder. It's things like that. So yeah, it's hard to articulate exactly what you're looking for, but it's a total package. Like, so as a head judge, when I get a class of, let's say, 7 guys come out at once, 6 or 7 guys, and I'm trying to move them around now, move the stronger guys to the middle and the other guys to the outside, so that we can start to decipher here, what it's going to look like. The first things I'll start looking for is shape, muscularity, conditioning for sure. But those are the things that are going to start to stand out to me. Is a taper there? The taper from the shoulders and lats down to the waist, the quads flaring out, as they go through the quarter turns. From the side, are the hamstrings dropped? Are the hamstrings nice and full? Or are they flat? Is the waist nice and small from the side as well? Does that taper from the shoulders and the lats down to the waist nice and tight? And you can also start to see the lat development in that as you're going through the quarter turns. Are the lats developed? Are they full? Are they how's the the attachments high, low, whatever. And then from the back, from the back, it's not just the back we're looking at. We're looking at the hamstrings, looking at the taper. And from the front, like even in a front relaxed pose, like the taper from the front, it's not just your shoulders to your waist, it's also the lats. All the lats are flaring out from the front and tapering to your waist, and all the quads are flaring out, sweeping. So it's all those things that'll start to stand out to you, and then you'll start to move guys around accordingly. And as you start to compare them more so and look more closely, then you'll start to point out the finer details that you're looking for: conditioning, symmetry, these things that'll put someone ahead of someone else or whatnot. So it's hard to articulate at times, but those are the things that I look for when I'm first assessing a class.
That's perfect. I appreciate you explaining that. Now, what is your perspective? Again, we'll just stick to open men's bodybuilding. What's your perspective from the 2021 Olympia? I've kind of got my perspective, but what are your thoughts on the top 5, top 6, and then specifically, I would love to know what you think about Rami's physique and just, again, we're not talking about the person, we're talking about the physique and just him as a now 2-time Mr. Olympia. So what do you think about the outcome of men's open 2020 Olympia? And then what do you think about just generally speaking, Big Rami's physique?
Well, the top 3 guys were the same this year as last year, right? So Rami, he's just so overpowering, and he's got shape for a guy so big. And even though this year, I felt like this year he was a little bit off from last year. I thought last year was the best Rami we've seen. Last year, to me, he was probably the clear winner there. He was just too overpowering for anybody else. This year, I think he left the door open a little bit, but he was still. I don't disagree with the decision at all. I agree with it. I just think he's just so overpowered. Like those quads are just so ridiculous. Like his shoulders are so wide. He's just got so much muscle. He may not have as much detail in certain areas as like Hottie, for example, or even Brandon. Brandon has that beautiful shape. But those top 3 guys all have such different looks, and it's difficult. Like I really like Hottie's look. I know he's a little bit thick-waisted from the front. That's his downfall. And he's short. If he's a little bit taller, maybe he wouldn't be giving up as much of that overwhelming factor as he does to Randy. But like Hadi, like what do you do with Hadi? Like he's good enough to win. You can make a strong argument for him to win, but then you're like, but Brandon's got such a beautiful look to his physique, and he came in better this year. He brought his legs up a little bit, and then you got Randy. He's just so big and got great shape, and he's so overpowering, and it's difficult when you're dealing with that level. It's very difficult, and sometimes you got to go pose for pose, and even that can be difficult sometimes to assess too. Like, so you'll go, okay, let's go pose for pose with these guys, then let's see who's got the most poses. Front double bicep. Randy's got a wicked front double bicep, so is Brandon. But you got to start looking at, the things like, are the quads as for, whatever, that you start looking at your details to determine who you think wins that pose. And some poses might even be a draw to you. And, you go to your front latch, but okay, who do you think has this pose, And I think when it gets to that level, if it's not clear cut as to who the winner should be, like those years when Ronnie was dominating, where it's kind of clear cut most of those years, I think you got to go pose for pose sometimes, and that might be your tiebreaker for you. And it can be a very tough decision sometimes. And then outside of those top three guys, which is very difficult to determine who you think should win, then you got your next group, like that 4 to 8 group. Those guys could have been easily interchanged among each other, and you could have made a strong argument for any one of those guys to be, Nick was fucking crazy, and you could have made a strong argument for Nick to have been 4th or even possibly 3rd, depending on what you like. Hunter, I know a lot of people have been, sort of critical of Hunter, and a lot of it had to do, I think, with the amount of sweating he was doing and stuff, he was holding a little bit of water, but from a lot of people that I've talked to and whose opinions I respect, they said Hunter didn't look as good on the live feed as he did when you were there. They all said when in person, Hunter was crazy looking. And he's bigger and he's got great shape, and he gets conditioned too, even though he may have been holding a touch of water. Ian, what do you do with Ian? Ian's fucking, I don't know, it's tough. And Justin came in looking great this year. I thought Justin looked better than last year, and he's so wide, and he's got an impressive physique. It's Monak, geez, man, like these guys are awesome. That top 10 group is incredible. That's a tough group to crack.
Yeah. So Rami's physique, I'm not a big fan of his physique. I just think his quads are just too much, and there's not a lot of separation. But from your personal perspective, just you loving bodybuilding, right? What do you think about Rami's physique? Just again, your personal perspective.
Yeah. I think his shape and size is crazy. Like he's got a small waist for a guy who comes on stage at almost 300 pounds. That's insane. His quads are probably the biggest quads we've ever seen in the sport. They're just insanely big. He's very wide. For my particular taste, I like more detail. Even though his back is super wide, I prefer more of a Dorian style back where it's, the lower lats are, like jolting out from your waist almost. Like a picture you have of Dorian behind you there. Like, he's off season shape there, it looks like, but look at his back. Like, to me, that's the look I prefer. And he doesn't get that grainy hardness again, like a Dorian, or even like a Hadi. Like Hadi is hard. But I don't know what it is. Like, maybe because he's just so imposing and so overwhelming, and being there is different. I know that gets said a lot, but I know, it's not just an excuse or whatever you want to call it. It's actually like a thing. Like I've watched shows, I've judged shows, and I've watched shows, and I've been on, every side of the stage you could be on. There is a big difference, like when you're watching it from 10 feet away from a judge's table. There is a big difference than watching it on a live feed or watching it from 30 rows up in a theater or something. There's like the transitions, that there's little things that you don't see that a judge will see from the table. And things get lost in transitions a lot too, like the transitions between poses. You don't see that stuff in pictures and that, but like a lot is told through those transitions, and I don't know. So that's why it's difficult for me to argue with decisions, that I see on a live feed or I see pictures of, because I know from my perception or from my perspective and my experience that it is different being on that table. So I can't argue with it. But just from when I was watching the live feed, my eyes kept going to Hadi, to be honest with you, out of that top 3. To me, I was inching towards Hadi. to be completely honest with you.
Cool. That's what we like, honesty, right? All right. So Paul, we're gonna kind of head towards the finish line. I want to touch on a couple more things before we wrap up our conversation.
Sure.
What words, I've got IFBB pros that listen to the podcast, got a lot of amateurs, a lot of Canadian supporters, because I've brought out on a lot of Canadian bodybuilders and athletes. But what words would you like to share with the amateur bodybuilders, the amateur athletes that are listening to this, you know, specifically maybe just from the perspective of a judge, maybe some things that you've maybe seen decrease over the years, some things that you would like to see the athletes do a little bit better job of? What can you share with the younger listeners, the amateur athletes, specifically bodybuilders that are listening to this? What are some words that you can share with them, please?
I think one of the things is, and I think it's because we live in a social media world now. Everybody wants to get on stage now before their physiques are ready in a lot of cases. Learn to love to train. Being on stage is awesome. You know, I personally never enjoyed it. I'm a bit of an introvert, so I don't really like being on stage myself. For me, it was more about the training for a show that really hooked me. I loved training leading up to that goal. And, you know, everything in your life being centered around that particular date. But actually getting on stage, you know, wasn't for me, but I get how some people enjoy it. And I think, but I see it a lot now. I'll get a lot of people messaging me on Instagram, a lot of newer people to the sport who have been training for a year or two. And they're like, hey, what do you think? Should I get on stage? And I'll be like, just take your time, man. Like, you're 22, you're 24, whatever, you know, age doesn't really matter. You're 32, whatever. Take your time, enjoy the process, enjoy watching yourself get better and putting on muscle. Cause that was like, I remember, like, when I was younger, I don't put on so much muscle anymore. It's more about maintaining, but when I was building muscle, like, you know how it is, like, you're looking in the mirror one morning, doing your hair, whatever you're doing, you're brushing your teeth, and you're like, hey man, like, my belt didn't look like that last month, you know, like, it's like, learn to love that. Like, and you know, you can't make progression when you're in a calorie deficit getting ready for shows. I mean, experience on stage is important, you know, to get that experience and to learn what it's all about, to get the jitters out, whatever. But learn to train, love to train, because if you don't love to train, you're not going to stick around in the sport. You know, the attention eventually will fade, and attention's only temporary happiness anyways. You know, I think you gotta love training if you're gonna be in this sport and be good at this sport. That's one big thing. Speaking to the bodybuilders now, which is sort of my area of, you know, more expertise, the area that I like to really focus on, because that's what I was as a bodybuilder. A lot of guys I see, and I see this mistake a lot, is they get fixated on their body weight. Because they see that, oh, you know, whoever, you know, Ian Valeri competes at 260 pounds. Yeah, but Ian's been competing for 10 years, and Ian's a top 6 pro in the world. Don't compare yourself to what Ian is. And weight doesn't matter anyways. When you're on stage, I don't know what you weigh when you're on stage. I don't care what you weigh. I only care what you look like. So guys get stuck on this number that they have to weigh this amount of weight, and it doesn't freaking matter. It matters what you look like. So, you know, hire a coach if you need to, whatever, you know, to get your head away from the scale and more what you look like. And you have to use experienced people around you who have experienced eyes to tell you that, you know, you got to drop more weight, whatever the case may be, you know. But that's a common mistake I see with a lot of open bodybuilders.
Excellent, man. Those are some great words. Going back here quickly to you and Fuwad, and then the possibility of you guys opening up a gym. I don't know how much you want to share or how much you can share, but why don't you talk about that a little bit? First of all, talk about kind of just having that private facility now that you guys are able to train at. Just talk about how that's been kind of refreshing. I know from Fuwad's perspective, just through obviously reading his social media, it seems like he's really been enjoying that. He thought he would miss being at the gym, being around, you know, kind of different people. But, you know, from his perspective, again, on Instagram, he's really enjoying it. So are you enjoying it? What's that been like training there? And then talk about maybe some of those future plans of opening up a gym there in Windsor.
Well, I was telling you earlier there how we don't have like a bodybuilders gym anymore in Windsor, so to speak. And during COVID, that became even more so. Like, for a while there, gyms were closed. Like where we live here in Windsor, Ontario, gyms were closed up until almost July. They were closed for 6 months. So, I mean, we've always had a place to train. We've always had like private gyms that will let us train there and stuff like that. So we've been lucky in that way. But it really got used to, it kind of brought us back to the old days, you know, a little bit where you're training with, you know, either by yourself or just with a few people, which was good because I was really starting to dislike the gyms in Windsor, these fitness centers, you know, but that's what we were stuck with, there's nothing else. So more and more we would talk about, you know, we just got to build our own gym, you know, there's just no place for us to train anymore. The gym, the private gym that kind of came to be because of the supplement company, you know, for video shoot and stuff like that. And it's great that we get to train there too. Sometimes though, when I work till like, if I work a shift where, you know, I don't get off work till 6 or 7 at night, who doesn't typically like to train that late at night, neither do I, but sometimes I have to. So I still keep a membership at this one gym it's about 20 minutes outside of Windsor in this little town called Tilbury. It's a competitor that owns the gym. It's called #Fitness. It's a small gym, but it's private, and it's like you can go 24 hours a day just with key entry. And it's well equipped. It's all old Cybex equipment. And it's a good atmosphere in there. He's got like this big mural of Arnold on the wall and stuff. It's really cool. So I go there to train whenever I can train with Fuwad at that gym right now. But yeah, there's no good gyms in Windsor anymore. And like, it's great having a private gym like that. But I think, you know, there's a lot of people out there who want that gym. And that's what I want to transition into, you know, leaving my job, you know, in the next 5 years. I'm hoping I want to transition into that. And I think there's a market for it here. And I think if we build it, you know, I think people will come, and I'm excited about it. And the only bad thing is like, you know, COVID, like prices on real estate and everything matter so much now, you know, but you know, we're no rush, you know, so we're starting to pick up some pieces of equipment here and there, storm on our garages, and then when the time comes, we find a right building, you know, we'll make a move. But
Cool. That'll be a pretty fun transition, I think, for you, Paul. So just wrapping it up, I want to kind of throw a few kind of rapid questions at you, and then we'll close it out. What are 2 of your biggest gym pet peeves?
so you froze there for a second.
What are 2 of your biggest gym pet peeves?
There's a few. I hate people who are there to socialize. I hate it. Gyms are not for socializing, or if they are, there's an area for that by the front desk or something. Like, I hate it when people are, because they don't realize how distracting that is to others. You know, when I'm training with Fuwad, there could be anything going on next to us. There could be a party going on next to us, and I'm focused on watching him for his sets in case he needs a spot. And I'm doing my sets, you know, focus on my sets. So if I'm training with Fuwad, I don't care. But when I'm training by myself, I do my best. I'll put my headphones on, you know, I'll try to focus on what I'm doing. But if there's a bunch of people next to me that are socializing, it throws me off. I fucking hate it. So that's one nice thing that with this private gym that I go to now. You know, I don't have that problem. It's quiet. There's only a couple people in there at a time. So I don't have that problem right now. That's my biggest one. That's my number one. My second one, it's probably just, you know, your average jackass that, you know, is like just trying to do something for attention in the gym, lift something that's too heavy, or, you know, making too much noise when it's not necessary just because he's trying to draw attention to himself, that kind of thing. Like your average gym.
For
Idiot,
sure.
I want to call him that. Yeah.
Do you have the next kind of quick rapid question, and maybe if there's more than one, feel free to share, but best Canadian bodybuilder, you know, that never received their IFBB pro card?
Never received a pro card in Canada? Huh. There's some good ones that are still right now trying to get their pro cards. Dorian Hamilton's a good bodybuilder trying to get his pro card right now. Tony Searley's a good bodybuilder trying to get his pro card. There's Steve Didishak out in BC. Steve's got a great physique. He should get his pro card, I hope, soon. There's one particular guy that didn't get his pro card. Louis Joseph, who did get his pro card, but didn't really compete as a pro much. I think Louis did 2 pro shows, maybe 3. Louis could have been an awesome had he stayed healthy. He ended up breaking his arm, tore his quads. He had some injuries that, you know, changed the way he could train and stuff like that. But Louis had the best genetics of anyone I've ever seen. Louis could put on muscle by looking at weights, like almost literally. The guy had the craziest genetics, and Fuwad will tell you that too. Fuwad was very close friends with him too, and still is. If I always said, if Fuwad had Louis' genetics, Mr. Olympia, no problem. Because Louis, even though Louis was very hardworking too, he didn't have that mentality like Fuad had, where he would do whatever it took to win. He didn't have that same mentality. Louis was a bit more conservative. I mean, you could argue if that was good or bad, whatever. Besides the point, I just think if Louis could have had Fuad's attitude, or if Fuad could have had Louis' genetics, Mr. Olympia.
Very cool. All right, so the kind of the last quick rapid question here. And I actually heard Ron Partlow on his podcast discussing this. I think it was last week. I think it's a fun question. You're going to be biased, I know, but
okay.
right now, currently, is it Fuwad or is it Ian, the best Canadian bodybuilder of all time? Right now, not what Ian could be in the future, but today. October 19th, 2021, in your personal perspective, who's the best Canadian bodybuilder of all time between Fuwad and Ian?
So you froze there for a second, but I got the question. Who's better, Fuwad or Ian, basically?
Yeah.
Obviously, I'm biased. Ian's a friend of mine too, but Fuwad, he's like my brother. I'll say this. Ian has definitely had more success now. You can't argue with, placing 7th at the Olympia 2 years in a row. Unfortunately, Fuwad didn't accomplish that. Ian finished 2nd at the Arnolds. Those are probably the 2 highest. Well, Ben Pekulski placed 2nd at the Arnolds once too, which I believe was the other highest ever Canadian placing at the Arnolds. If I'm not mistaken, 7th at the Olympia is the highest for the Canadian ever, other than back in the day, there was a Canadian, back in Arnold's day, I think it was Mohammed Makaway. I believe he was a Canadian citizen. And he used to place pretty high back in those days. Well, I don't know exactly how high. But Ian's won 3 shows now, or 4? I believe 3.
He won 2 this year.
2 this year, 1 last year, or 2 last year.
Could be 4. Because it
might be 4 now.
He had to. He qualified for the Olympia in 2018. Was that through a win?
I don't know. I think so. He won that big man show out in Europe, I think.
Yeah, I think it's 4.
Yeah, I think it's 4. So, and Fuad's won 2. Statistically speaking, Ian has been more successul. If I had to compare their physiques, which would be a really cool comparison, both at their primes, if you can, put them back, go back in time and put Fuwad back at his prime against Ian right now. That would be good. Fuwad, I think Fuwad at his best, in my opinion, would edge out Ian. But it's so hard to say, like, what ifs, and when you don't see 2 guys on stage next to each other, it's such a different thing to try and, predict. And obviously, I'm probably a little biased too, but I'd say Fuwad. But he has been the more successful, no question.
But you know what, Paul? That's exactly what Ron said on his podcast last week. Is that Fuwad at his prime? Ian, he's in his prime right now. He's going to keep getting better. We know that. But they also kind of said they would still take Fuwad in terms of physique, right? In terms of physique. But they said the same thing as you. You can't deny what Ian has done in terms of his pro wins, his place.
Right.
You can't. The stats don't lie, right?
You're right. Yeah.
Physiques. Ron was actually right with you currently. Yeah. So kind of
really. That's cool. Well, me and Ron are good friends, so it's not surprising that we think alike.
Yeah, no, I know. I was going to ask you about that. I know you connected with Ron here not too long ago. You went out to West Coast Iron and you were out there for a little bit. That's a pretty awesome gym, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, I went on vacation with my family in the summertime. We went to BC. My wife never been to BC before. My kids haven't either. So we wanted to do like the tourist thing. We went to Whistler and saw everything, which was really nice. I've been to BC several times, but I never really did the tourism thing yet. So it was really nice. And I wanted to see Ron. I wanted to see Ron's gym, so I stopped to see Ron. And I was just with Ron last weekend too. I judged a show in Vancouver, and Ron was the MC. So it was cool. We got to hang out all weekend. Yeah, I love Ron, big Ron. I wish I lived closer to Ron. We'd probably hang out every day.
Yeah. No, I actually had him on last week on the podcast, and he's just one of those guys. You ask him one question, he's going to go for 30 minutes, but it's great because he's just a great hearted individual. And
He is. He's got some stories too.
yeah, great stories. I appreciate it. So, Paul, that's we're gonna stop right there. I'm sure we could probably talk bodybuilding for another hour,
Yeah.
but we're gonna end it there. I feel like we had a really thorough conversation. Is there anything in closing that you kind of want to share with the listeners? And then if somebody wants to connect with you, obviously we know you're connected with Fuwad, you're on the podcast there, but if somebody wants to connect with you through Instagram, after you share any final words, go ahead, share your Instagram, and I'll close us out.
Yeah, my Instagram is at Paul Lauzon 1, which I probably should change. It's like basically my email that I just put as my Instagram. I'm not very techy, but anyway, people always send me pictures and ask me advice, like young competitors, and that. I'm very open to that. I'm happy to help people. I thank you for having me on your podcast. I've been asked to be on several podcasts recently, and that's something that's new to me. I'm grateful that Fuwad included me on his podcast, and because that's where I think a lot of people have gotten to know who I am, which has been really nice. I'm kind of an introverted person, but it's nice when people know your name and stuff. Like everywhere I've been recently, like Saskatchewan, BC, everybody, I run into somebody who watches the podcast and has something to say about it. And it's awesome, man. Like it's really cool that that many people from podcast, it's like all you see is the people on the screen that you're talking to. So it doesn't even dawn on me that people are watching this. So I feel very comfortable doing them, a lot more comfortable than I would be in a different setting, because I get stage fright sometimes. Like when it comes to like public speaking, I don't enjoy it, and I have to really work on it, and I get nervous. Even with head judging, I sometimes get nervous still when have the mic and I don't know. I just have this thing. I don't know why. But on a podcast, all I see is you, or all I see is Fuwad or the guys on the podcast. And so it's just like sitting down at a table, having some food and talking. I don't feel any nervousness about that. So I enjoy doing the podcast, and I really appreciate that, that you've asked me, and several others have reached out to me. Because, I don't really think I have anything interesting to talk about, but some people might think I do, and I'm grateful that people do.
For sure. And you're very welcome. And I just always, appreciate just hearing people's stories. And that's kind of why, again, behind the muscle, like we see the stuff on social media, we see, the guys on stage, we see the muscle, but all of us tie our shoes the same way. We all put our pants on the same way. We all, have normal lives, so to speak. We're all human beings. So, and we all have a story, and your story is, you just shared your story. Somebody's going to listen to it some way, somehow they're going to connect, and your story is going to impact. And I think that's the power. I know that's the power of human beings sharing our story. That when we share our stories, no matter whether we think we have a cool story or a boring story, what have you, our stories, when they're shared, can be heard by other human beings, and that story can positively impact somebody else. So thank you for coming on, Paul. Greatly appreciated. Listeners, thank you so very much once again for listening, for watching. If you're on YouTube, to Behind the Muscle podcast. If it wasn't for you guys, this podcast, the YouTube channel wouldn't be where it's at today. So thank you so much. 2 favors I would ask: hit that subscribe button on YouTube. I release all of these episodes first on YouTube. That's why it's important for you to be subscribed to Behind the Muscle podcast YouTube channel. And then the second favor I would ask of all of you, take Paul's episode, share it on all your social media platforms. Make sure you tag Paul, tag myself, so we know that people are listening. People found value specifically in Paul's episode. Also, in the comment section on YouTube, if you're tuning in through YouTube, why don't you just share with Paul, share with myself what your favorite part of Paul's story or our conversation was. That would be super cool. And then finally, I will leave you all with this. Remember, behind the muscle, there's always a story. We'll catch you guys later.